Believe it or not, has anyone ever actually told you that your body's joints can literally caramelize? Yes, that's right, caramelize. That is, they can end up like that hard crust you get when you sprinkle sugar on top of a cake and burn it. You're going to be surprised. Come with me and I'll tell you about it. You'll see. There is a very specific and fairly common kind of physical pain that most people eventually learn to ignore. They do this not because the sensation actually stops hurting, but simply because they have been told repeatedly that it is just a normal part of life. They say it is just your age, or perhaps it is just standard wear and tear. They tell us we all inevitably end up like this, and so you eventually just accept it as your reality. I'm talking about that persistent and constant pain in your knee. You go down the stairs very slowly, you get up from your chair quite carefully, and you avoid walking too much. Then, one day, the doctor looks at you, points to an X-ray, and tells you something serious that chills you to the bone. They say, "There's no turning back now. We'll have to think about surgery." And look, I heard those words while looking at an image of my right knee, and it looked like the knee of a man 20 years older than me. My sister had just been through surgery. She had 2 titanium knees put in, went through a long rehabilitation, and also had quite a bit of post-operative pain, and everything seemed to indicate. I truly believed that I was traveling down that exact same path, and I eventually accepted it in the very same way that you might accept the inevitable. However, something quite unexpected happened that completely changed everything for me. You see, right around that same time, I ran into Aitor, a good friend who is a professional personal trainer and not only has excellent training, but also has a great deal of knowledge. Scientific curiosity, and he asked me a question that no one had ever asked me before. He didn't ask how much it hurt, nor did he ask when I was going to have surgery. What he asked was, "How much sugar do you consume?" That question in reality changed everything, because what no one had explained to me, what no orthopedic surgeon had told me, was that my knee wasn't wearing out because of time. My knee was becoming caramelized. And that, unlike what I had been told, actually did have a solution. And today I'm going to tell you how that process works on the inside, with names, with science, and with the researchers who have proven it and who, as so often happens in this field, have been ignored by the system. And I'm also going to tell you how, on the very day the pandemic began and the world came to a halt, I started to recover my knee. Without surgery, without injections, without titanium, and in 3 months. Since then, almost 7 years have passed. So, take a moment with me and think about the word wear. That's the word most often used when someone wants to talk to you about joints. They tell you it's natural wear. It's the wear that comes with age. You know what? You've done too much sports. And they tend to treat the situation as though your knees were simply the brakes of an old car that have completely deteriorated and worn down from so many years of constant and heavy use. And that image is so simple and so logical that it's exactly what prevents millions of people from finding a real solution to their problem. Because if it's wear and tear, it turns out there's nothing to be done. You just have to wait. And the next step, if you're lucky, is the operating room. What if it isn't wear and tear? What if what's happening inside your knee is something completely different? Something that has a precise scientific name, an identifiable cause, and above all, a solution that doesn't involve surgery. And that's exactly what I'm going to talk to you about in a moment. You see, to understand it first, I need you to meet 3 characters. They are not general practitioners. What they are is researchers who have dedicated their lives to understanding why tissues become diseased. And also, as is so often the case on this channel, they are people the system would prefer you didn't know about. The first is Dr. Robert Lustig. He is an endocrinologist, a pediatric endocrinologist at the University of California, San Francisco. They have spent decades trying to silence him because he dared to say in public something the food industry didn't want anyone to hear. He said that sugar is not just a food, but also a metabolic toxin, and its effects are not limited to your gut. They reach every last corner of your body, including your knees. And here, I'm going to make a brief note for you. When Dr. Lustig specifically talks about the concept of a metabolic toxin, what he is really trying to explain is that its inherent harm has absolutely nothing to do with the simple intake of calories or the process of gaining weight, but rather it deals with how sugar directly sabotages the delicate internal chemistry of your body's engine room. The second is Dr. Alessio Fasano. He is a gastroenterologist and also a researcher at Harvard. He discovered something that connects your gut to your knee in a way that, when you hear it, will probably seem impossible to you. And then you'll understand that not only is it not impossible, but it's actually inevitable. And the third is Gerald Pollack, a biophysicist from the University of Washington. And if you've seen the videos I've published about water, you already know him, you've already heard about him. His research on structured water within tissues explains something fundamental about how cartilage works when it's healthy and why it stops working when the internal environment fails. They are 3 scientists, 3 different disciplines, and all 3 point to the same culprit. But before introducing you to that culprit, I need you to understand something about your knee that probably no one has ever explained to you. Your knee is not a mechanical mechanism. Your knee is a hydraulic system. And that difference changes absolutely everything. When you think of your knee as a mechanical mechanism, you imagine it as 2 bones rubbing against each other. And if they rub together a lot, they wear down. The truth is, it makes sense. It's the same logic as the logic of a car brake. But in reality, it's much more sophisticated. Between the 2 bones of your knee, there is a structure called cartilage. And cartilage is not just a simple rubber shock absorber. In reality, it's a living, moist, electrically charged tissue that works like a precision hydraulic gel. You see, think of a sponge soaked in water. When you squeeze it, the water comes out. And when you let go, the water goes back in. Well, that's exactly what your cartilage does with every step you take. It compresses and expels fluid, then decompresses and absorbs fluid. And in that fluid are the nutrients that keep the tissue alive. That's why I tell you it's a hydraulic system. In fact, it's not just that, it's also a perfect system. As long as it works properly, your bones don't rub against each other. And it's not because there's a rubber piece between them, as I mentioned, but because there's a film of synovial fluid maintained by the hydraulic pressure of the cartilage. And you might ask, but what is synovial fluid? Well, it's the natural lubricant of your joints. Imagine you open an old squeaky door hinge and you put a drop of oil on it, and what happens? It stops squeaking. That oil is to the hinge what synovial fluid is to your knee, but with one important difference. The oil you put on the hinge in your imagination is passive, but synovial fluid, on the other hand, is intelligent. It doesn't just lubricate, it also thank you. It nourishes the cartilage, which doesn't have its own blood vessels, and depends on this fluid to receive the nutrients it needs to stay alive and remain elastic. To put it in another way, synovial fluid acts as both the essential lubricating engine oil and the comprehensive nutrient delivery system for the tissue. So, when this fluid is in the optimal and healthy condition, the knee joint works smoothly without any friction, and the cartilage stays perfectly hydrated and elastic. But when this fluid deteriorates, everything else fails in a chain reaction. Well, in the case of the knee, synovial fluid allows the bones to remain separated with almost zero friction. And you see, friction is the resistance that occurs when two surfaces rub against each other. When you walk, your bones move closer together and farther apart with every step you take. If they rubbed directly against each other, like two stones being scraped together, they would wear out very quickly, and on top of that, it would hurt a lot. However, almost zero friction means that the contact between surfaces generates so little resistance that it's as if there were no friction at all. It's like when you slide an ice cube over a wet surface. There's almost no resistance because the water acts as an intermediary and practically eliminates all the friction. In your knee, the synovial fluid does exactly that. It comes between the two surfaces of bone and cartilage and keeps them so perfectly separated and lubricated that friction is practically non-existent. Engineers have spent decades trying to create artificial materials that can replicate this lubricating ability. The best materials they've managed to make, including Teflon, actually have more friction than a healthy joint bathed in synovial fluid. That is to say, they still haven't quite managed to achieve it. And this can give you an idea of just how extraordinary the system inside each of your knees is. But not only that, also, it will give you an idea of how serious it is when that system starts to fail. Therefore, the problem is not caused by mechanical wear. It begins to manifest itself when that once perfectly functioning hydraulic system gradually begins to break down and fail. And that is exactly where the role of sugar comes into play. Let's pause for a moment, because what comes next is very likely something no one has ever explained to you this way. In fact, you'll see, this is where the part begins that your orthopedist probably never mentioned to you. When Aitor asked me how much sugar I consumed, my first reaction was probably the same as everyone else's. I told him I don't eat much sugar. In fact, I'm not into sweets at all. And you're probably thinking the same thing right now. This is the first mistake we all make, because it turns out that when we talk about sugar, we're not just talking about the sugar you put in your coffee or those pastries you might have on the weekend. We're talking about everything your body turns into glucose. Bread, rice, pasta, natural fruit juices, and especially those juices that are advertised as having no added sugars. Breakfast cereals, cookies that seem healthy because they have oats, store-bought tomato sauce, yogurt with fruit. The reality is that your body doesn't distinguish between the sugar in a packet and the sugar in sliced bread. It turns. All of them, all of them, are turned into glucose inside your body, and that glucose is what enters your bloodstream. And within sugar, it turns out, there's also a type that's especially devastating for collagen, fructose. But to keep this short, its story is so serious that it deserves an entire video, and I promise I'll make one a little later. Well, that's it for now. Really, nothing new so far, but what comes next will probably be new to you. Do me a favor, try to answer this question. What exactly happens when there is too much glucose circulating in my blood for a very long time? Well, to understand this, I ask you to come with me to the kitchen. Wait a second, not literally. Come with me to the kitchen in your mind. Come with me because I'm going to make honey soy glazed chicken. And you'll see that when I put the chicken in the oven with honey, at first the chicken is soft and flexible. But as the heat works and the sugar from the honey penetrates the fibers of the chicken meat, its surface will turn brown, shiny and stiff. And if I leave the chicken in the oven for too long, the outer fibers of the chicken will get so tough that they'll crack when you cut them. And what I'm telling you actually has a scientific name. It's called the Maillard reaction. It is the complex chemical reaction by which sugar molecules bond together with proteins whenever intense heat is present. It is this very process that makes bread turn into toast, causes meat to brown beautifully in a sizzling pan, or gives your morning coffee its rich, distinctive dark color. It's a truly beautiful reaction in cooking. It looks wonderful, but inside your body, it's a devastating reaction. Because what happens in the oven with chicken and honey happens exactly the same way inside your body, with collagen and sugar, with one difference. In the oven, the heat is intense and the process lasts minutes, but inside you, your temperature is a constant 37 degrees. And in your case, the process takes years. It's slower, more silent, but just as relentless. The surplus of glucose molecules in your blood begins to attach themselves to the proteins in your tissues slowly, completely without you even noticing it, and without causing any physical pain or discomfort at first. And this process inside your body is called glycation. Glycation is literally the caramelization of your tissues from the inside, which is the same thing that happens to the woman, the glazed chicken. Dr. Robert Lustig, the endocrinologist from San Francisco I mentioned a few minutes ago, has spent decades documenting its effects. And what he has shown is that sugar is not just a source of calories. He has demonstrated that it is a molecule that, in excess, reacts chemically with the proteins in your body and damages them in a cumulative way. And you see, the protein that suffers the most damage is also the most abundant protein in your body, collagen. I'm sure you've heard of it. It is the essential structural protein that makes up your tendons, ligaments, skin, and the connective cartilage in your knees. Think of it like a heavy-duty braided steel cable, long, flexible, and incredibly resilient fibers twisted tightly together to provide your body's tissue with both elasticity and immense structural strength. This complex network ensures that your joints and skin remain durable under pressure. Well, when you have excess glucose in your system and that glucose binds to collagen through the process of glycation, what actually happens is a specific phenomenon that scientists call cross-linking. And what are cross-links? It's incredibly simple. The structural collagen fibers, that is, those strong braided steel cables, actually begin to stick and fuse together. And they do so as if someone had spilled glue between the cables. At first, you hardly notice it, but over time, the cables stop moving freely. They become rigid, lose their elasticity, and when pressure is applied to them, instead of yielding and bouncing back like they did when you were young, they crack. That's exactly what happens to glazed chicken if we overcook it. When it is inside the oven, and again, it is exactly the same biological process that is happening to the soft cartilage inside your knee joint. It is not simply wearing down and deteriorating from daily use. Instead, it is becoming increasingly rigid and extremely brittle, because of the sticky chemical glue that sugar has been continuously depositing between its collagen fibers over the course of many years. The final products of this process, that is, those caramelized and glued collagen molecules, have been given a name by science that's also worth remembering. AGE. AGEs. AGEs are the English initials for Advanced Glycation End Products. Advanced Glycation End Product. AGEs. And now, think about this with me for a moment. The English word I just told you, ages, in English means ages. It's as if science itself wanted to tell you something. And that something is, these products are what make you age. They are what cause your tissues to lose the elasticity of youth and become as rigid as those of an old body. And what I'm telling you is not a metaphor, this is pure chemistry. The more ages you accumulate in your cartilage, the stiffer it becomes. The more it loses its ability to absorb impacts, the more it cracks from friction, and above all, the more it hurts. And this brings me to what Dr. Koyamam tells you about osteoarthritis, that it's inevitable and that surgery is the only solution. In many cases, what's really happening is a very specific chemical process called collagen glycation, and it turns out that it actually can be stopped. Well, up to this point, you already know something that probably no one has ever explained to you before. You probably already know that your knee doesn't simply wear out. It actually caramelizes. But look, there's even more to this story. Something that, when I tell you right now, will probably seem almost impossible to believe because it turns out your knee isn't just suffering all alone. There is a specific organ located hundreds of kilometers away from your joint that is constantly sending intense signals of war directly to the delicate cartilage. And it's an organ you would never associate with your knee pain, yet it could actually be the real source of your joint inflammation. I'm talking about the intestine, your intestine. And I know what you're thinking, but Jose Maria, what does my intestine have to do with my knee? Well, it turns out that it has a lot to do with it. And as surprising as it may seem, it actually has everything to do with it. You see, to understand this, I need to remind you for a moment about Dr. Alessio Fasano, whom I mentioned earlier, the Harvard gastroenterologist and researcher. He is one of the most important scientists of recent decades in the field of intestinal medicine. Fasano discovered something that changed the way we understand many diseases that apparently have nothing, or were thought to have nothing, to do with the gut. He discovered zonulin. Zonulin? Yes, exactly that, zonulin. But what is zonulin? Well, you see, to understand it, I just need you to imagine your intestine as if it were a high-security customs checkpoint, and one of the most difficult things your intestine has to do, and you know this perfectly well, is simply to let through only the nutrients you need, amino acids, vitamins, minerals. But at the same time, it must also prevent anything that shouldn't enter your bloodstream, bacteria, toxins, undigested food fragments, from passing through. And to do this job, the cells that line your intestine are joined together by what scientists call tight junctions. Imagine them as if they were the screws that keep the joints between floor tiles sealed. As long as those screws are tightened, the floor is airtight. Nothing can slip through the joints. Well then, zonulin is the protein that controls those screws. And when zonulin increases, the screws loosen, the joints between the intestinal cells open up, and what was once a high-security checkpoint becomes a border full of holes. And what slips through those holes? Bacterial fragments, toxins, pieces of food that haven't been properly digested. In other words, things that shouldn't be in your blood. And this condition is called leaky gut, or if you want to use scientific terms, intestinal hyperpermeability. And this is where the connection to your knee becomes inevitable. When those bacterial fragments called LPS, which stands for lipopolysaccharides, enter your bloodstream through that leaky gut, your immune system detects them immediately. What are LPS? Well, they are fragments of the outer wall of certain bacteria. Your immune system recognizes them as danger signals, like an alarm. That goes off. It's as if they were fragments of enemy soldiers' uniforms found inside your house. And so, as I was saying, the alarm goes off. Your immune system immediately sends soldiers to look for the enemy. And you see, the problem is that those soldiers travel through your blood and reach everywhere, including your joints, and when the soldiers of your immune system arrive at the knee looking for the enemy, they find cartilage already damaged by glycation, that stiff and brittle collagen I mentioned before. And what do? They interpret it as if it were tissue in danger, as if it were a war zone. They respond just as any immune system would to a threat, with inflammation. And this inflammation is the pain you feel. In other words, it's not wear and tear, and it's not age either. It's your own immune system attacking your knee because your gut happens to have holes through which signals are leaking. Of war. But you see, let's go back to Fasano, because what he discovered after this is even more important for us. The question is, what triggers zonulin? So what exactly makes those screws come loose? Well, it is mainly due to two specific things: consuming too much gluten and sugar. It's the same sugar I've been talking to you about from the beginning. Excess sugar in the diet triggers the production of zonulin, opens up the intestinal barrier, and allows LPS to enter the bloodstream. And by doing so, they activate the immune system. And it's that inflamed immune system that ends up attacking your joints. Consuming excessive sugar not only effectively caramelizes and degrades your collagen directly through glycation, it also compromises the integrity and opens the back door of your intestine, so that your own immune system unwittingly initiates a full-scale war against your knees. So, there you have two mechanisms attacking you and a single culprit. And when Aitor explained all this to me, I understood for the first time why the orthopedist had never asked me what I ate. It seems to me that no one ever taught my doctor to look beyond the knee. Well, up to this point, you already have two very clear mechanisms. Consuming excess sugar caramelizes your collagen through a process called glycation and increases the permeability of your intestine, so that your own immune system begins to chronically inflame your joints. But there is a third mechanism that very few people know about, and for me, it's the most fascinating of all, because it connects directly with something I've already talked to you about on this channel: cellular voltage. To understand it, I need to introduce you to a character that lives inside your cartilage, and who does truly extraordinary work. It's called Proteoglycan. Don't be intimidated by the name, because in reality, it's simpler than it seems. A proteoglycan is a special molecule that lives inside your cartilage and has an extraordinary property. It turns out that it is electrically charged in a negative way. And what does this mean in practice? Well, look, think about two magnets. When you bring the same pole of two magnets together, they repel each other, they move away from one another. No matter how hard you try, you can't make them stick together. Well, proteoglycans do exactly that. Since they all have a negative charge, they simply repel each other. They are constantly repelling each other, and by doing so, they create a space between them, a space that water immediately and permanently occupies. And that water trapped inside the cartilage is what gives it its cushioning ability. Remember the soaked sponge I used as an example with you a few minutes ago? Its resistance comes from the water it contains, and your cartilage works exactly the same way. As long as the proteoglycans retain water, the cartilage can absorb impacts. As long as the water is there, the knee doesn't hurt. The problem starts when sugar interferes with that system. And here comes the part that connects everything we've talked about today. Can you explain exactly what happens to proteoglycans during the process of glycation? Sugar binds to them. The ages I described to you earlier not only damage collagen, they also attach to proteoglycans. And by doing so, they alter their negative electric charge. It's as if someone were neutralizing the magnets one by one. When the negative charge decreases, the proteoglycans no longer repel each other with the same force. The space between them is reduced, the water they used to retain starts to escape, and the cartilage loses its ability to retain the hydraulic pressure it needs to function. In other words, it starts to dry out from the inside. And this is where Gerald Pollack comes in, the biophysicist from the University of Washington, whom you already know from my videos about water. Pollack studied something he called, the exclusion zone water, or as he also calls it, EZ water, exclusion zone, that special state of water that forms when it comes into contact with electrically charged surfaces, like the membranes of your cells or exactly like the proteoglycans in your cartilage. When that water is properly structured, the cartilage functions. It works perfectly as it should, absorbs impacts, regenerates, keeps friction almost at zero. That's what I was telling you about earlier. But when sugar damages the electric charge of the proteoglycans, that water loses its structure and stops behaving like a precision hydraulic gel, becoming just an ordinary liquid, which actually can't withstand the pressure that cartilage needs. The result is cartilage that flattens with every step, that doesn't regain its thickness between impacts, and that stops protecting the bone. In the end, it hurts. And it hurts not because it has worn out, but simply because it has lost its voltage, it has lost its electric charge, and it has lost its ability to retain the water that keeps it alive and functional. When Aitor explained this to me, I understood something that no X-ray had ever been able to show me. My knee wasn't broken, it was discharged. But now let's pause with me for a moment. We've been together for a while now, and we've seen things that probably no one had ever explained to you before. If you're still here with me, it's because something about all this is resonating with you, and probably also because you recognize in your own body some of the signs I've talked about. Well then, before we continue any further, let me take a moment to do a quick and thorough recap with you, not just to repeat, but rather so that every detail clicks perfectly into place all at once. You see, first, your knee doesn't wear out from use. What happens is that excess sugar caramelizes chemically the collagen in your cartilage, making it rigid, brittle, and unable to absorb impacts. We call this process glycation, and its end products are known as ages. 2. That same sugar creates holes in your intestine and triggers a protein called zonulin. Through those holes, bacterial fragments slip in, activating your immune system, and that inflamed immune system ends up attacking your joints. The persistent pain in your knees may actually have its root cause originating deep within your gut. And furthermore, consuming sugar also neutralizes the essential electrical charge in your body of the proteoglycans, which are, remember, those molecules that retain water inside your cartilage. And without that charge, the cartilage loses its hydraulic capacity, flattens, dries out, and once again hurts. Well, now I'm going to explain to you exactly why each of those three changes worked. But first, let me tell you how I discovered it myself. It was March 2020. The whole world was coming to a halt. Governments were closing borders and people were buying toilet paper as if it were gold. And I, with my knee wrecked and my appointment with the surgeon postponed because of the pandemic, suddenly found myself locked up at home without knowing what was going to happen. So I said, well, I'll call Aitor and see what he says. I told him, Aitor, they've postponed my surgery and I don't know how long I'm going to be like this. And what did he say to me? I definitely wasn't expecting it. He said, perfect, that's wonderful news, because now it turns out you have time to do everything you need to do and do it right. 2 days later, an elliptical bike arrived at my house, and that's where it all began. What Aitor actually proposed to me wasn't complicated. It was very precise, and it was 3 changes, but all 3 applied consistently and with an understanding of why they worked. Eliminate sugar, restore electrolytes, and move the knee without putting weight on it. And now, after what I just told you, imagine what the pandemic was like for me, stuck at home without eating pasta, rice, bread, or sweets. But the reality was that I was in pain and had the chance to save my natural mobility. In 3 months, the pain was gone. I quickly stopped missing those tempting foods my friends told me they were making at home. And almost 7 years later, I still haven't had surgery, and I'm still pain-free. Now that I've explained this, I'm going to tell you exactly why each of those 3 changes worked. It's not magic at all. It is the result of highly advanced and meticulous precision biological engineering. You see, the changes, as I already told you, were only 3. But before I tell you about them, I also want you to understand something important. I'm not going to suggest a diet, nor am I going to suggest an exercise regimen. What I'm going to suggest is something different. That you change the conditions of the environment where your cartilage lives. That is exactly the same thing I told you in the video about Pasteur and Béchamp. And remember, the environment is everything. And the environment of your knee basically depends on 3 things. The first, cut off the supply of glue. And this is where it all begins, because without this, nothing else works. As long as you keep fueling the glycation process with excess glucose, ages will continue to accumulate in your collagen. Zonulin will keep opening up your intestine, and the proteoglycans will keep losing their electric charge. Cutting out sugar doesn't mean going hungry. It means understanding what it really is. Sugar for your body. You already know it's not just the sugar in the packet. It's bread, it's rice, pasta, juices, and all those ultra-processed foods that surround us. And I'm not asking you to cut everything out all at once or forever. What I'm asking is that you start seeing them for what they really are. Chemical glue for your joints. And when I understood it, don't think that giving them up was any easier for me. No, it wasn't. The truth is, it was a real sacrifice, honestly. But it was a sacrifice supported by a decision that I knew was based on science. And honestly, as I was saying, things changed right away. After 3 months, the results were so noticeable that I simply stopped eyeing bread, packs of pasta, and bags of rice. And you see, it's been almost 7 years now that I've only eaten them when I had absolutely no other choice. Have I stopped liking them? No, I love them. I'm always looking forward to eating a pizza. But honestly, I prefer myself without knee pain. The second thing is to restore electrolytes. And here, remember what we've seen in other videos and what we've talked about today. Proteoglycans, those electrically charged molecules that retain water inside the cartilage, need their negative electric charge to fulfill their function. And their electric charge depends directly on the minerals you have in your body, the electrolytes. Without minerals, there is no conductivity. Without conductivity, there is no charge. Without charge, Proteoglycans can't retain water. And without water, the cartilage flattens and it hurts you. How do you restore electrolytes? Virgin sea salt from salt flats, that is, not refined salt, but virgin salt with all its minerals intact, a pinch in the water you drink throughout the day, is more than enough to start restoring the electrical conductivity your cartilage needs. And remember, if you want to go a step further, there's the isotonic water from Quinton that I showed you in the recent video I published a couple of days ago, the Pasteur and Béchamp video, and there you already know it's 1 part seawater to 3 parts low mineralization mineral water. In other words, it is, quite literally, like restoring the ancient primordial ocean right back inside your aching joint. When the proteoglycans regain their proper mineral environment, they recover their charge, they start to repel each other again, they retain water again, and the cartilage begins to recover its hydraulic capacity. And now we come to the third point, which is moving the knee without putting weight on it. And this is the one that surprises people the most, because our instinct tells us that when something hurts, what you should do is not move it, protect it, stay still. But it turns out that cartilage doesn't have its own blood vessels. It doesn't receive nutrients directly from the blood like the rest of your tissues do, and therefore cartilage is nourished by diffusion, by mechanical pressure. And this, what does this mean? Well, think of a sponge. So when you squeeze it, it expels the old liquid. And when you let go, it absorbs new liquid. That's exactly what your cartilage needs. It needs this to receive nutrients and to be able to eliminate waste. It needs movement. It needs rhythmic compression and decompression. But not just any movement. It needs movement without impact, without excessive load. And that's where the elliptical bike comes in. The elliptical is almost perfect for a damaged knee because it simply reproduces the natural movement of the joint, but does so without the impact of the ground. In other words, there's no collision, no jarring, and only you get the gentle, rhythmic compression and decompression that cartilage needs to absorb nutrients and expel the waste that causes inflammation. I started with 10 minutes a day, slowly, without pushing myself, just so my knee could start moving and getting nourished again. Over time, I gradually increased, and with each session, the cartilage was regaining its ability to stay hydrated. The proteoglycans started working again. The synovial fluid was regaining its quality, and as I've already told you, it wasn't fast, but it was steady, and steady was enough. Now, to finish, I'll give you one more point to consider. Is there something that no X-ray can show you? It can't show you the chemical stiffness of collagen that's been caramelized by years of excess glucose, can it? It can't. It also can't show you the microscopic holes in an intestine with zonulin levels off the charts, can it? It can't. And it can't show you the lost electrical charge either, can it? In proteoglycans that have been depleted of minerals. It can't do that either. What an X-ray can show you is the final result of a process that has been silently unfolding for years. And when that result finally becomes visible in the image, the traumatologist tells you what he told me. There's no turning back now. But that's not true. Because the way back isn't in the X-ray, it's in the terrain. Remember Maillard, remember Bernard, and remember Quinton. The terrain is everything. And the terrain of your knee has specific parameters that you can change. Which I changed. Without surgery, without limitations, without injections, and without titanium. And why wouldn't you be able to change them too? I did it because I understood what was happening, what was really happening inside my cartilage. And I changed the conditions that had led it to that point. So don't wait for it to show up on the X-ray. Take my experience as your own. 7 years later, I go down the stairs without even thinking about it. I get up from the chair without paying attention. And I walk as much as I want. And when someone says to me, you know what? It's normal for your age. What I know is exactly what that means. And it means that no one has taught the person telling me that to look beyond the X-ray yet. Well, now you know. Looking beyond changes everything. If you liked the video and think it could be useful to someone you know, you'd be doing me a big favor by sharing it. You will help me spread this knowledge and, as I always say, keep moving forward, always forward, and I will read through your comments.